So Sabine, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in South Africa, in Cape Town. I went to school locally and to university here. And I then lived and traveled overseas for almost 8 or 9 years and eventually came back to South Africa and have really been very rooted in South Africa and in Cape Town.
So tell us, what was your dream career when you grew up?
So I didn't have one, actually. And I think that's common, maybe common to some people. Like, I didn't have a dream career. To be honest, I didn't know the range of careers that were out there. And it resulted in me actually studying logopedics, which is science, the science of speech and hearing therapy, which I studied for 4 years and never worked at and never actually used as a profession. And this was the problem. In fact, I can say I only started dreaming of my direct career much, much later in life because I didn't know what options were out there.
So where did you go from logopedics?
So during my studies at UCT as a very young student, in my early 20s, I worked as a tour guide in order to pay for my studies. And then guiding led to my love of tourism in all its forms. And that was really the first eye-opener I had as to the tourist industry. But even within that, I worked in the tourism industry for 10 years before I was able to stumble upon the science of managing visitor attractions. And a light bulb went on and I said, this is what I want to do. This is what I love. And to be fair, that was about a 10 or 15-year career trajectory where I focused very strongly on the specific niche and science of managing tourist attractions. And then I stumbled upon the science of thinking about the future. And finally, I find now at 50, I finally found my place somewhere in the nexus of futures thinking, tourism, and visitor attractions management. And I'm still trying to work out how they all go together. So my message really is that one doesn't always know exactly what you want to do because you don't know necessarily what you're good at and what's available and what the gaps are. Now,
you managed the world's #1 tourism attraction, the cableways on Table Mountain, for I believe almost 10 years. Is that correct?
That's right. I was the managing director for 10 years, yeah.
So can you maybe share a highlight or two during your 10-year tenure?
So the first highlight was getting the job as managing director because it was such a privilege to be able to manage such a highly visible tourism attraction. And the second highlight was really visiting the International Association of Attractions and Amusement Parks, and for the first time understanding that visitor attractions themselves is a science in itself. And that's when I really explored that path. In terms of career highlights at the Cableway, I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we managed to get Table Mountain voted as one of the new 7 wonders of the world. That was an amazing project to work on. And then another highlight was, with full-time and seasonal staff, we had almost 300 staff on site. And it was always a great, great joy for me to interact with staff at all the different levels and with all their different hopes, fears, and expectations. And it was a great pleasure for me to do that.
And tell us, in terms of managing the visitor experience, what would you say, especially looking into the future, what should one really be aware of when it comes to managing visitor experience?
So the first thing to become aware of is that the future visitor has different needs to the visitor today and the visitor of yesterday. And trying to understand what those needs are is going to be very important. So for a start, in South Africa, we have a very interesting dichotomy where the world's demography is aging populations, which means aging visitors that have different needs. Yet Africa's population is very, very young and will continue to be a youth population. So any visitor attraction will need to understand how to engage with and provide an experience that the youth would enjoy, at the same time catering for an experience and engage with visitors that are perhaps older and have they're not necessarily disabled, but they need bigger font when they're reading things. They might not be as technologically savvy. They might have mobility issues. And so attractions are really dealing with this vast dichotomy. But mainly, visitor attractions in the future, I think, will become a social space where people engage with each other, because we have a lot of entertainment online, whether that's anything from video games to social media interaction. I mean, a lot of our downtime takes place online now. So, and there's been many trend analysis to show that in-home spending in entertainment has vastly increased over the last 10 years at the expense of money and time that we spend out of the home. But attractions have a very specific role to play in that when people do decide to geographically leave their home, they do so with greater intention, and often with the main reason being to socialize through learning, socialize through experiencing something. So it's a massive shift.
And tell us, Sabine, looking back over your career, who inspired you? And maybe especially in your young days?
I often get asked this question. I never have a single answer. I keep wanting to come up with a name, but I actually don't have a who at all. I take inspiration from many different bits of people and realized, there's no one person that encompasses everything. So I've always taken bits of admiration from everybody around me, if that makes sense.
Right. And tell us your career, looking back over your career, would you say there was a major turning point where you made a certain decision or you took a certain choice, but your career could have gone very differently?
Well, yes, absolutely. And it's often only in hindsight that you see that these positions were turning points. So, in a way, it's the difference between seeing life as a bet where you've got to choose a decision and stick with it, or seeing your life a little bit more experimental, where you try things out, and if they work, you stay, and if they don't work, you find something else. So the first turning point was that I signed up for a logopedics degree, at the end of which I then realized I didn't want to use, and I became a tour guide with no understanding of whether I would do this for the rest of my life. And then within tour guiding, I got involved in the tourism industry, and I saw, there's a number of ranges within this industry. And then a massive turning point was understanding that specifically within the tourism industry, I'm very interested in the visitor attractions management side, which is a science that is not really, I will say not really focused on. It's not focused on at all in South Africa. And that came very late in life. That was at 40. And now my next turning point has been the day I sat in my first lecture to do my master's in futures thinking. A light bulb went on. I said, well, this is exactly kind of the edges of which I've been playing with. I didn't know there was even such an official term for this. So I suppose I call it experimental living, where you do the best you can with where you are, but you don't always know what your options are, and you don't always know whether that's going to be a choice you want to do forever. Does this make sense? I'm being a little bit all over the place.
It does make sense. Okay. And tell us, as a founder of Attractions Africa, how important would you say are attractions and attraction management for the future of the continent?
I think it's absolutely critical. So attractions are the backbone of the tourism industry. I don't believe people travel in order to stay in a hotel or to have the best car hire or be with the best tour operator. They travel to go and have a visitor experience or attraction, or visit something they want to see. And certainly in Africa, I mean, every other continent in the world has an attractions association except for Africa. And certainly in Africa and South Africa, I've noticed that this is not a science that people focus on. It's really the lost child of the tourism industry. So when I refer back to saying that experiences and attractions are going to be the reason people leave home, I mean, it's an analog experience. It's something that you can only engage with if you actually leave your desk. I know there's virtual reality, but it's very different to putting your feet in the cold Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
I believe it'll only gain in prominence.
So what is driving you today?
curiosity, I would say.
Yeah.
And really, there's two aspects. One is sort of the one driver is driving this attractions industry, making it better, making people understand that there are tools they can use. There are courses you can go to, which we'll be offering, etc. So that's very much consolidating almost all the work I've done in the years up to now. And then at the same time, I'm experimenting and playing with the new focus area of mine, which is how we think about the future and how we help our communities and those we work with become more literate about the future, less afraid of it, understand our hopes and fears and expectations about the future, and how that may affect what we choose to do today. So it's really, I've got two parts to what I'm engaging with at the moment. And interestingly enough, both drive me, both are massive drivers. I keep wanting to focus on one or the other, but it always comes back to both.
Well, maybe they are connected. And
yeah.
So let's talk about the future, and especially the future of leadership. What does the future of leadership mean to you?
So I think the future of leadership to me is currently in a very unknowable and uncomfortable place, because leadership models we've used in the past aren't necessarily going to be valid or useful going forward. Each generation has a different way of engaging with futures. And one of the things I was thinking about is that in the past, leadership was often a very physically present sense of leadership. You saw your leader, you had meetings with them, they stood up and gave talks in staff meetings or did presentations. And leadership now in the future, I think, will become much more geographically distant. So often you don't meet the people you are leading. Often you're doing thought leadership through how you blog or write about things. And understanding how to lead without the physical interaction is going to be an interesting process.
That's very interesting. So what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
The most important thing for me is know thyself. If you don't know yourself and understand who you are, what drives you, and what your authentic self is, what your personal values are, I don't believe you can be a leader. And I also, and again, this is an age thing because I'm 50 this year, is an understanding that yourself changes over the years. And so to constantly be investigating yourself and trying to understand yourself. I mean, I'm back in personal coaching again. I don't necessarily do it consistently, but every few years I go back in again and try to understand how I've changed and how that presents to myself and to others. So I think knowing and managing yourself is actually the most important thing. From there, everything else can be built on.
So when you speak to future leaders, what is it you tell them they should focus on for future-proofing their career, if that is possible?
So I don't believe you can future-proof a career because we don't even know where it's going, but I think you can future-proof your attitude. So you need to be curious, adventurous, playful, collaborative, and engaged. And so if your attitude about your career and the future of your career is curious, adventurous, playful, engaged, and collaborative, you've got a chance at future-proofing your career. But I mean, my career at the moment is A, still in definition mode again, and B, 1000% different to what it was 25 years ago.
Now, today we're living in a very technologically driven world. So when it comes to leadership, what would you say are the technologies or maybe the tools of technology that future leaders should learn and master?
So again, we don't even know what technology is going to come around the corner in 5 years' time. But for me, it's around how we handle the lack of physical presence that I think will be in the future. So, the disembodied company where everybody works for one company, but People are all over the world. They're phoning in once a week. Perhaps have never met your colleagues that you're working very closely with. They're working from home. They're working from all sorts of areas. And similarly, the gig economy, where perhaps, well, we know the future of permanent 40-hour-week employment, even for professional people, will change vastly. So to lead without being physically present really is an issue. So it's not necessarily a technological tool, but it's how we are going to have to learn how to interact with what technology has given us, which is an ability to work together without being geographically present.
Right. Now, obviously, that involves social media. So what is your advice? What is your advice? Yeah, sorry.
What I want to say is, so for me, what current technology has brought us is a lot of noise, a lot of digital noise, where you are inundated with tools to use, information, useful and not useful research, etc. And so I think, again, a key internal technology for the future, if you want to use it, that is a sense of mindfulness and self-exploration, because we're going to have to help ourselves manage this digital noise and help us filter the digital noise for those around us that we are working with.
And when it comes to social media, Sabine, what would you advise future leaders? How should they go about using social media for building their own brands, their personal brands?
Yeah. So again, I think it's constantly changing. And again, I think there's a lot of digital noise on social media. And it seems like there's not just one tool that you can use. So I, for example, I'm very strong on Twitter, but I now realize there are many, many young people who are never on Twitter and they do everything through Instagram. How do you translate your academic writings onto Instagram is an interesting question. So again, and it's about curating what you present that's authentic to yourself, hence know yourself, and curating what you present in terms of filtering out digital noise, because both of those are only going to get louder.
Right. Now, as a mentor to future leaders, I mean that both in a formal and informal way. Can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah, I can't think of anyone. I do get a lot of people. Just yesterday or the day before, I bumped into someone who had said to me, "You might not remember me, Sabine, but we had a conversation once and X and Y happened and I followed your advice and this is what I did." Actually, people often say to me, "Oh, thanks for giving me such and such advice," and I don't even remember saying it. Right. Ultimately, I am in a few formal mentoring roles, but it's the informal roles that I've had greater impact on. And really, when somebody says to me, "I found my own voice and my own path," that is what I deem as success. And it comes in very, very many different forms.
And are there any role models of leadership, or maybe models of leadership, or even books about leadership that you would recommend future leaders should study and learn from?
Yeah, I just have never found a one thing. And maybe it's my personality, and maybe that's why I've called my business Curiositas. But I have just always stitched together ideas and role models from a wide range of people, and then created something that is useful to me. So, I really read a lot of books and I engage with a lot of different people with different interests and different experience and different education. And stitching that together has worked for me. I'm reluctant to say one person or one book. I just don't necessarily believe that's the way to go.
Right. And tell us, how can our listeners connect with you and where should they follow you?
So they can follow me on Twitter, which is @CityBowlKid, or on my LinkedIn, Sabine Lehmann. My business name is Curiositas. Those are the two main ways.
Okay. And last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own life?
Yes, I'll go back to saying, know yourself and understand that yourself changes. So you can't know yourself once and then that's it. And then I would say we all need to start engaging and becoming curious about the future and understand how we're going to think about it. So become futures literate, which is really an explicit understanding of how we think about the future, because we all do it subconsciously, but to really conscientize how we think about the future in terms of the tools we use and why we think about the future in terms of what we want out of that future. So those two things, I think, form a bedrock and a framework for everything else that you're going to work with.
Well, Sabine, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership, and I would obviously also into the future of attractions, and reminding us that at the end of the day, it all comes back to know thyself.